Hi guys, and welcome to another video. So I woke up this morning, turned on my laptop, and I saw Apple had just released their latest OS. So I thought it's quite fitting to make an updated video about installing a macOS VM. So let's jump over onto my Unraid server, the one here I call Apple Crumble. And why do I call it that? Well, because this Unraid server is actually running on a Mac Mini. And if we take a look at the hardware here, this is actually a 2018 Mac Mini, but I upgraded it to 32 gigs of RAM. I picked up the Mac Mini for £220 and 32 gigs of RAM I think was about 40. Anyway, a nice little machine, and I thought it'd be fun to run Unraid on it. And there's another reason that I want to run Unraid on this Apple hardware, is because I don't want to break Apple's EULA, and so by me having this Unraid server running on top of Apple hardware, I'm actually fully compliant with Apple's licensing agreement, so no problems there. Now you can see the version of Unraid that I'm running here is the Unraid 7 beta, but we can do this on Unraid 7 or Unraid 6, it's no problem there. And to install this macOS VM, we're going to use my newly rewritten Macinabox container. Now I've spent the last few weeks putting a lot of time into fully rewriting this, making it super easy to be able to install the macOS VM. Now with the new Macinabox, it actually can send notifications through to the Unraid server's web GUI here. This keeps us informed of the progress when it's downloaded the install OS, when the VM's been installed, and if any errors happen to happen along the way. The notifications will allow us to see that straight away. So in order to make sure that can happen, let's go to Settings here, and then we want to go to Notification Settings. And for notification display, this can be on either summarized or detailed. I recommend using detailed because the notifications, they stay up on the screen longer, so we're less likely to miss it. And for Macinabox to be able to send notifications to you, just make sure the Docker update notification is not set to never check, just set it to something here. I just set mine to once a day. Okay, so with those settings set, it's going to allow the container to be able to send us notifications so we can see what's happening during the install of our macOS VM. Now, before we go and install this container, I just want to say for anyone who has been using my earlier version of Macinabox, well, the new version is quite different. If we take a look at the old Macinabox template here, we can see that it could actually install Big Sur, Monterey, Catalina, Mojave and High Sierra, that's all. And there's various other things that we have to fill out. Down here, you can see that we have to put the domain share in twice, the ISO share in twice, and things like that. In the new version, we don't have to do that. The whole template and container is totally streamlined, but it does mean because it uses a different actual template for the new Macinabox to work correctly, we need to remove the old Macinabox template. But if you were to update Macinabox with the old template, it would warn you and tell you what to do to fix it. So let's have a look at what it does if we update Macinabox when using the old template. So I'm going to click on Apply Update here and pull down the latest version. So to see what's happening in the container, if we click onto the icon of the container and then click Logs, we can see here that it's detected that we're using the old version of the template, and because of that it's cleaned out the Macinabox app data and gives us instructions on how we can remove the old template, replacing it with the new. So I'm going to go ahead now and do that. So just click onto the Macinabox icon here and then click Remove. Confirm that to delete the container. So although we've actually deleted the container, we haven't actually deleted the template. To do that, let's go across to Apps here and then click on Previous Apps, and we can see that Macinabox was previously installed. So we just need to click here and then click Delete, and this will actually delete the template. So now if I type in Macinabox and search for it, we can now install it and it will pull down a new template. Okay, so the Macinabox template is quite different. At the top here, there's basic instructions explaining how to use it and what the variables are. Now for operating system versions, we've got Ventura, Sonoma, Monterey, Big Sur, Catalina, Mojave and High Sierra. So we just need to choose which one we want to install. Now what we can do here is we can name our VM. If we leave this blank, then it will basically just be named the name of the actual OS. but maybe you want to install more than one version of Ventura, so you could call it here something like Ventura 2. I'm going to keep it exactly the same as it is. And now here we choose the type of vDisk we want to have for the VM, either RAW or QCOW2. And next, the vDisk size. The size is in gigabytes, so by default it's just set to 100 gigs. You don't really need to worry about the delete and replace OpenCore. You can leave that set to no, but we will come back and look at that, what that's for, a bit later on after our VM is installed. And underneath that you can see default NIC type here. This allows us to choose the virtual network adapter for our VM from what you can see here. However, some versions of macOS, they don't support all network types. So if you were to choose one that wasn't supported by the particular version of macOS that you've chosen, well, the container will realize this, and when it installs the VM, it will use a compatible NIC. An example of this is most modern macOS versions, they support VirtIO.NET. But if we wanted to install an old version of macOS, say something like High Sierra here, High Sierra doesn't have any drivers for VirtIO.NET, so the container would realize this, and when it dynamically builds the XML for the VM, it will put in a compatible NIC rather than the one specified here. So basically, we can override the default NIC type so long as it's compatible with the version of macOS. Next, underneath here we can see CPU args. This allows us to choose from 4 different CPU configurations. We've got one for Skylake, 2 Penryn configurations, and at the bottom we can pass through, if it's an Intel CPU, the Intel CPU as it is in the host. But the default Skylake should work absolutely fine, but you can change these if you want to try and see if you can get better performance with a different setting. At the bottom here we've got 3 paths that we need to set for the container. For most people they can just be left at the default, but the first one here is where we set for where our VM images go. In Unraid the default is in the domain share, but you can change that if you keep yours elsewhere. So just like your other VMs, a folder will be created here with the name of the VM and the various vDisks that macOS needs, one for its data storage and an OpenCore vDisk it needs to boot with. And underneath here is where we define where our ISO share location is. And so what Macinabox will do is download the macOS version you've chosen in the template from the Apple servers and put it in your ISO share. This way, if you want to install another macOS VM of the same version, Macinabox will check here first to see if it's already been downloaded before. So using the locations that we define here for the VM images and the ISO share, Macinabox will dynamically build the XML so everything points to the correct locations for your server. And the last path at the bottom here is the app data path, where on your server you keep your app data. Okay, so I'm going to click on apply to pull down the container with the new template. Oh yeah, and we can see an Unraid warning notification here saying non-compliance with Apple's EULA detected and the container's exiting. Now Macinabox, when it runs, it can give both Unraid notifications and of course you'll see notifications in the container log. So let's take a look at the Macinabox logs. And this gives us a little bit more information, basically saying that we've indicated that we're not compliant with Apple's EULA, and so the container is going to exit. Because in order to install a Mac VM, you are meant to install it only on Apple hardware. Well, so like we saw earlier, my Unraid server is running on an Apple machine, so I'm going to go back across to my Macinabox container now, and if I scroll down to the first variable here, I can set are you fully compliant with Apple's EULA. I can change that from no here to yes, and whilst I'm here, I don't think I want to install High Sierra, I think I'm going to install Sonoma. Okay, so with those changes made, I'm going to scroll down to the bottom and click on to apply. Okay, so now there aren't any warning notifications, so the container's running correctly, and shortly we should get a notification here telling us that the install media has been successfully downloaded. But of course we can have a look at the container's logs as well, just so we can see what's going on. Okay, so both in the log and in the notification there we can see that the Sonoma recovery media has been downloaded. So now in a few moments we should get a notification telling us that the VM is ready for us to run. Okay, so there's the notification. So now if we go across to the VMs tab, we should see our VM there. Okay, so we can see the Sonoma VM is now here. Now there's a couple of things I want to adjust. So I'm going to click onto the VM here and go to Edit. The first thing here is I want to up the amount of CPU cores used with this VM. By default, Macinabox just chooses 2 CPU cores to kind of be compatible with those of us who may not have very many cores on our server. And also I'm going to increase from 4 gigs to 8 gigs of RAM for this VM as well. Now just a side note on VM cores in macOS VMs. Previously when we've installed a VM, if we don't do the core count to the power of 2, which I mean like by 2 cores, 4 cores, 8 cores, then the Mac VM might not run. The fix was to remove the topology line in the XML, and that allowed us to use unusual core count. What I really wanted to do with this version of Macinabox is I wanted to make it really easy for users to change things and not have to go and edit XML. So what Macinabox will do if we put a strange core count like 5 cores here, is it will detect that and then it will automatically remove the topology line, making sure the VM can run. Now another thing Macinabox can do is you can see here the machine type for me is set to Q35 version 9.0. This is because it's the highest version that the Unraid version that I am on will actually support, but Macinabox will check and see what the highest version of Q35 is that you have, and it will set it to the highest version accordingly. Now if we scroll down a bit here, we can see here that Macinabox has created 3 different vDisk locations. The first of which at the top here is an open core image, which is basically a bootloader allowing us to boot macOS. And you can see here that the open core image has been put in the vDisk location here in my domain share. This second vDisk here, this is the Sonoma Apple recovery image, which was downloaded from the Apple servers, and we're going to use this to install EOS in a moment. And we can see that this actual recovery image is not in the same location as the other 2 vDisks. This one is in the ISO share because it's basically install media and we might want to use it again. So the third and final vDisk here, this is basically a blank vDisk where we're going to install the operating system on when we start up the VM in a moment. And all of these locations were what we chose in the template earlier when we chose our domain share and our ISO share. Now if we scroll down a little bit here, if we look at these network settings here, the actual network MAC, Macinabox randomly generates this MAC address, but it ensures the first 6 digits match Apple's EULA, making it identifiable as an Apple device. Also, Macinabox detects what the default network source is for your VMs and puts it in accordingly. So you might not be using BR0, your default network source might be something different, so if it is, Macinabox would put it in. Another thing Macinabox will do as well, it will ensure that your virtual network adapter is on the proper bus and slot. Because if it isn't, basically macOS it won't see the network adapter at all and we won't be able to use it. Now you can't actually see the address here, that's in the XML, we will just take a quick look at it in a moment. But if you make any changes and that gets changed, Macinabox will fix it and always make sure it's correct. So let's scroll down a bit further and see what else is in this XML for the Mac VM. We can see here we've got this custom QEMU command line items here. Now this custom XML is essential for any Mac VMs to be able to work. Without this they just won't boot. Now in Unraid versions previous to Unraid 7, any custom XML like this would be automatically stripped out of the XML if you ever made a change in the VM template. But thanks to the improvements in Unraid 7, these items are no longer stripped out of our templates and we can actually edit them directly in the GUI. But don't worry if you're still running Unraid 6, Macinabox has got you covered for that. If it detects that this XML is actually missing in your VM, it will put it back in, making sure everything's okay. This part of the custom XML here at the bottom is the virtual CPU type that the VM's going to use. Now we actually selected this in the Macinabox template. By default it's on Skylake, but we can change that in the Macinabox template. At any time we can just change it there, rerun Macinabox and it will swap this out for us. So what I'm going to do to actually simulate if we're on Unraid 6, Unraid 6, like I said, would strip out all of this custom XML. So I'm going to strip this out, scroll down to the bottom and click onto Update. And so before we fix the template, let's just go and have a look at the XML, and I can show you the things that Macinabox will fix. So obviously we've got our 5 virtual CPUs here, and by default we've got this topology line. Macinabox is going to strip this out because we've got the 5 virtual CPUs. So if we scroll down a little bit here you can see by default, now that I made an adjustment in the VM manager, the network adapter has been put on bus 1. So that wouldn't work. So Macinabox will fix this in a moment. And let's scroll right down to the bottom here, and we can see we've got no custom XML. So to fix that, all we need to do is go back to the Docker tab here, and if we have a look at Macinabox in its template, what Macinabox does is if it detects it's got a VM that's called Sonoma here, it won't try and reinstall it, it will just try and fix the XML. Obviously, if we put in a custom name, it would look for that custom name and try and fix the XML for that particular VM. So there's nothing actually we need to actually change in the template for it to fix the XML. All we need to do is just run Macinabox again, and it will make all of the changes we need. Okay, so there we can see XML checked and fixed, updated successfully. So let's go back to the VMs tab here, and let's have a look at the raw XML here. So our CPU count, it's still 5, that's good, that's what we want. But we can see here that the CPU topology line has been removed, so this will mean that our VM will actually boot. So let's scroll down a bit more and find the network adapter. So now we can see here the address for the network adapter is being put on bus 0, so macOS will be able to detect this network adapter absolutely fine. And finally, let's scroll right down to the bottom, and here we have our custom XML put back into the template. Now, I know what some of you might say, oh, you shouldn't show the Apple OSK key. Well, in fact, it's absolutely fine to show the key. It's perfectly legal to do so, nothing wrong with showing that key. In fact, we can see this court document here that I'll leave a link to in the description. If we scroll down to page 3 here and look at line 16, here we can see the OSK key in this court document that Apple wanted to have sealed, and it was judged that they weren't allowed to. So nothing wrong with actually me showing this key in my video. But still, what I would say is please don't post it on the forums, because it is actually against the rules of the forum to do so. Okay, so let's move on and get this VM installed. Okay, but I think before we start, if you notice here that the icon for this VM is just an orange Apple symbol. Now, by default, Unraid doesn't have any Apple icons, but if you want proper icons for the various different versions of macOS, we can install another container here. If we go across to apps here and do a search for my custom VM icons container here. Now this container will install a whole bunch of different icons for various different OSs as well as macOS. So just scroll down to the bottom, click onto apply, pull down the container, and it will give you a whole load of different icons for different OSs for your VMs. And once you've installed this container, just set this to always auto start. So every time your server restarts, it can update the icons, making sure that they're always available. Okay, so now if we go back to the VMs tab here, I'm going to click onto the Sonoma VM here. I'm going to click Edit. Okay, so now in the VM template, I'm going to click on the icon here, and I'm going to scroll across looking for the Sonoma icon. Okay, so there's Sonoma. I'm going to select that icon, scroll down to the bottom of the page and click on to Update. Now, because I've made an edit in the VM manager, I want to come back across to Docker here and run Macinabox and just make sure all the XML is fixed. So anytime you make any changes in the Unraid VM manager, whether you're using Unraid 6 or 7, come back across to the Macinabox Docker container, run it again so it fixes the XML. Okay, well, finally it's actually time to start up the VM. So let's click onto it, click Start, and go to a VNC window. So at the moment we're booted up into OpenCore, Once in OpenCore, we can see all the bootable devices that we can actually boot up. And that's why we can see the macOS base system image here, which is what we actually downloaded using Macinabox earlier from the Apple servers. So we're going to want to select that and hit enter and boot into the Apple recovery media. Okay, so this bit, it can take a while, so let's speed it up. Right, so now we're booted into our second vDisk, the recovery media, and we want to click on the disk utility here, which is going to allow us to format the actual drive that we're going to install macOS onto. So we need to have a look here, just click on each one and find the largest one. Obviously this is mine here, the 107 gig one, so this is the drive that I'm going to format. So we just need to select it and then click on to erase. I'm just going to call it macOS, and I'm going to leave the format set here as APFS. Now some people say it's better to use macOS extended, but I haven't had any trouble using APFS. So I'm just going to click on to erase here, and done. Okay, so the drive's now formatted, so I can close this window here, and now I'm going to click on Restore macOS Sonoma and click Continue. Okay, so once you're on this screen here, click on to Continue. Now, if for any reason here it says you don't have any internet, that will be because you made a change on the template and you forgot to run Macinabox again to fix the XML, because your network adapter is going to be on the wrong address. Okay, so once here, we need to agree to the software license and then choose where we're installing to. And obviously that's going to be the hard disk here that we just formatted. Now it says it's going to take about 2.5 hours. It really doesn't. This often goes down quite rapidly, but it does take a fair time. Okay, we're down to 33 minutes now. Now during this process, it will reboot multiple times. So for the moment, I'm going to pause this and come back in a moment. Okay, so this is the first reboot. And you can see now we've got macOS installer present as well as the macOS base system. So basically, the last stage was just downloading the macOS installer, and now we're going to actually install macOS. So I'm going to hit enter here. And again, this is going to take a little bit of time. So I'm going to pause the video here and come back in a bit. Okay, so this is the second reboot. So again, I'm going to click on to the macOS installer and click enter. Okay, so now third reboot. Again, we can see here now that the installer's disappeared and now we've got macOS. So I'm going to click onto that and we should be now booting straight into Sonoma. Okay, so it looks like we're not there yet. There was another reboot. So again, let's just hit enter into macOS. Okay, so here we are. So obviously we just go through the wizard here, choosing our country, time zone, that kind of thing. Again, we need to agree to terms and conditions. Then again, we just, after agreeing, we just put in our user account, choose an icon, that kind of thing. Go through the rest of the wizard, and then once we're through, it'll ask you to identify your keyboard. So just do that. And you can see here now that it's actually come to a white screen. So I'm going to log out and just log back in. You see on the login screen, I've got like a picture, but there's a reason why the screen is blank on Sonoma. It's because I don't have a proper graphics card and the background I've got is an animated one. So it's not going to show up unless I install a graphics card. macOS is very picky on what graphics cards you can actually use. So if you want to use a GPU, then do some research on which ones actually work with macOS and you can pass them through to your VM. There's lots of info online about what GPUs are compatible with macOS. If you look at any Hackintosh guides, they'll tell you the ones that work. Also, if you need any help, then jump on the Unraid forums and go to the Macinabox support thread, and I'm sure you'll find some help over there. And what you can see me doing here is I'm on the wallpaper section of the settings in macOS, and I'm just looking basically at the different wallpapers here, looking at the ones that aren't animated so they'll just display correctly, even though I don't have a proper GPU. Okay guys, so I think that wraps up this video about the new Macinabox and how it all works to install a macOS VM. Now, I really hope you find it useful and you enjoyed the video and you enjoy using the container. Now, I may well make a follow-up to this video if you want to see more things about the macOS VM. I'm actually going to try, I think, and pass through the iGPU of this Mac Mini to the VM. I had a little try doing it earlier, but I didn't actually get too far. But I think I'll have a closer look at it later in the week. But anyway, guys, if you did like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'm getting closer and closer to 100,000 subscribers. Well, I'm still probably 25,000 off, but slowly getting there. But before I go, I want to give a really big thank you to all of my patrons and supporters out there. Thank you very much, guys, for those of you who support the channel. Thank you for you guys who are Patreons. Without you guys, I really wouldn't be able to make these videos. And I really do thank you from the bottom of my heart for you guys allowing me to do what I really love. Anyway, guys, it's getting late here now and it's time for me to go. But whatever you're up to for the rest of the day, I hope it's good and I'll catch you in the next video.